Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Audit Committee this evening. I will begin with apologies for absence and substitutions. I have received apologies for lateness from Suresh from Mazars. He is leaving an Audit Committee meeting at Camden Council early in order to be here, so he'll probably rush in about half an hour. So I've received those apologies. Thank you. We'll move on to urgent matters. None, thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Are there any matters to be considered in private? Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting, are they approved as a correct record of the previous meeting? Great, thank you. We'll move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the review of the Treasury policy and strategy. I believe that's you, Emma. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the Treasury Management Strategy Report for 2025-26. This report provides the Council's draft Treasury Management Strategy, statements, MRP strategy and annual investment strategy for the coming financial year. Members are recommended to review and note the strategy for 25-26, which will be presented to full council on the 4th of March. I will take the report as read. However, just a key point to note is that obviously the continuation of the current counterparties is unchanged. However, there is an internal decision which you'll find also in the Treasury Management Q3 report that I'll move on to recommence based on certain criterias the investments with local authorities, which we had as an internal decision previously that we ceased that. That's the only key change within the report this year. I will take any questions.
Thank you, Emma. Are there any questions? Alan, if you could use your mic, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So there we are. New to me as well as to everybody else actually is the liability benchmark. Could you just say a few words about that and what that is showing us, please?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Alan. So the liability benchmark, it aims to compare the current borrowing and the liability benchmark. So this is sitting where our current borrowing is and what the expected borrowing could be. So if the borrowing portfolio is in line with the benchmark, so if we're looking at the graph within the report, if the borrowing portfolio is in line with the benchmark, the authority doesn't have an additional external borrowing requirement. If the borrowing portfolio sat below that benchmark, this indicates a borrowing requirement. And it's the difference between the two. So if we track the graph that's in there, what we're saying is the difference between where the liability benchmark is, which is our benchmarking for how much we need to borrow, and our current position. So there is a big gap there, but that obviously is being funded with internal borrowing funds at the moment.
Thank you, Emma. Alan, does that answer your question? And do you have any further questions?
Oh, there we go. On this item, yeah, page 35, reference to the inflation outlook. There was an unexpectedly high announcement for inflation last week. Does that make any material difference to the strategy?
So obviously the main impacts of the result of high inflation figures would be interest rate forecasts within the strategy. However, given the cash balance of the council has a slower decrease in interest rates would be welcome at this stage. This would lead to a possible increase in interest income. So the council isn't nervous about what the general impact is when there is an inflationary increase as we saw announced recently. But we do also have to balance this against the increasing costs that would be incurred when inflation increases. So as a result, we'd see less cash to be able to invest because our costs would go up because of the inflationary increase. But I would expect the two impacts to be quite balanced, and the strategy itself should be left in a stable position given that prudent approaches to both the spend and the interest that we've been reporting and forecasting So we believe the strategy is still stable despite the high inflationary increase.
Emily, did you want to come in on either of those questions?
Yeah, I'll just come in back, just going back to the benchmark, because I think it is a new indicator, so it's a new requirement. And Emma was referring to the graph on page, I've just gone to page 33 there. I think just because it's called a benchmark, sometimes I think members who are used to that definition might suggest that there is a level that we can compare to other local authorities. It's not meant to be a benchmark to do that sort of comparison across authorities, because this will be based on a number of historic decisions on funding capital. The benchmark's really there, as Emma has said, to compare the actual borrowing to what the total borrowing requirement is, but also to look at the pattern over time. So as you can see, it's sort of increasing gradually, as essentially we're taking on more borrowing to fund capital expenditure. Now, that would mean that we have increased borrowing costs, but a number of those areas of borrowing, for example, the sort of increase that you see in the next financial year is because we've got plans to spend money on temporary accommodation. So we will have an asset for which we're borrowing against, and also that temporary accommodation will bring rental income. So we expect the rental income to meet the costs of the borrowing. So it was just to sort of explain really that benchmark is a benchmark to sort of track over time and against itself, rather than to benchmark across other local authorities. And I think Emma perfectly answered the other question. The strategy is set, the strategy overall is set to allow us to manage in lots of different, we've been really uncertain around inflation and interest rates over the past few years. The strategy itself is set in quite a flexible way to allow us to respond to those changes as and when we see fit. So if, for example, there is a, I don't know, significant world event that means interest rates go through to the floor, at that point we might think about borrowing for the housing revenue account, which we know has a lot of capital commitments going forward. So the strategy needs to be responsive to that external context, so that we can make the right decisions for the council as and when they occur.
Thank you, Emily. Any further questions on this item? Councillor Martin.
It's just more a clarification for myself, really, but on page 50, it talks about the HRA ratios, and there's a jump 25-26 between 24-25. I just wondered where that comes from.
Is it the top table you're referring to, or the second one?
I think
they are tracking the same, yes. So, and is it the debt figure that you're seeing that jump in? So the HRA debt at the top. Yep. So that's based on with the debt figure increasing, you'll find is there will be a like-for-like equivalent of spend within the capital programme that will be going through budget at the moment. So those align together. So where we've got the spend in the capital budget, you've got the increase in the debt showing here.
So would that have been the debt that we took out a long time ago coming through, or is
no?
It new debt?
Yeah, so this will be an increase. So this is going to be additional spend where, as similar to what Emily just explained about the where we're spending on an asset, we get that asset and we will receive rent from that asset. But in order to fund the capital expenditure, it will be funded by borrowing, whether that be internal borrowing or external borrowing. It's our debt will increase, or the HRA debt will increase because it's unfunded capital expenditure.
Emily, would you like to come in?
So if actually we've got the person in the room that's going to spend that money, or at least one of the two people is going to spend that money. You'll know that we're undertaking a stock condition survey on all of our HRA assets. So as well as that, we've now got a housing asset management programme in order to invest in our current stock, which Joe deals with. You don't need to answer the question, I'm just saying that so there's an asset management programme in terms of investing in our stock there, and then there's also the regen programme and the regeneration of our estate. So that's all capital expenditure that will require us to borrow. Certainly the regen hopefully brings the rental income with it to help us manage those costs, but certainly in terms of our current estate, it doesn't bring with us additional income because we're already getting the rental income of the residents already live there.
Thank you, Emily. Are there any further questions? Thank you. That brings us to item 7, which is the Treasury update for Q3. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides an update for the Council's borrowing investment activities for the quarter ending 31st of December 2024. All Treasury management activities has been carried out within the approved limits. And the report also provides information on the prevailing economic conditions over the reporting period. Members are recommended to note the Treasury management activities and the Council investment balance of 455.192 million as at the 31st of December. I will just take you to note point 26. I should say that this should say that the recommendation is for the recommencement of local authority investments. I believe that it misses out the words local authority. So just to clarify that in point 26. Otherwise, I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Thanks, Emma. Any questions? Great, thank you. That brings us on to item 8, the Financial Management Code, and this is Emma again.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so this is the Financial Management Code self-assessment for 2025. Recommended to note the Financial Management Code self-assessment at Appendix 1 and the areas for improvement for future years found within Appendix 1. I suppose the key point is that the expectation within the Financial Management Code is that all councils will be fully compliant by the 31st of March in 2022. Ealing Council, after their self-assessment, does view itself under the self-assessment as being fully compliant. The areas for improvement are just the continuation of the council's to constant improvement on financial resilience. If anyone does have any questions on any of those areas, though, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Emma. Any questions for Emma on this item? Alan?
Thank you, Chair, and a good performance against the code. We are fully compliant. I welcome the fact that we will continue to get updates on our performance against the code. There is a reference in there in a couple of places to a review of financial regs, which is about to commence. Also to a review of the Constitution, which I gather is well advanced, but probably in relation to financial regs, would the committee find it helpful to be involved in that review, to have sight of those draft financial regs before they go to council?
I mean, if the committee agree, then I think that could be useful. Yep, agreed. Yeah, thank you, Ellen, for that suggestion. Any further questions from you, Alan? No. Sandy?
Yeah. In terms of being fully compliant, is this a self-assessment or has it been audited by internal audit to say that we are compliant?
Emily?
Thank you. It is a self-assessment. I don't believe we have actually had an internal audit of the Financial Management Code. I'm relatively comfortable with it. It's not something I would sort of particularly think of a significant risk that I'd want Mike to look at. But having said that, I'm always welcome to review and challenge. So yeah, I think probably internal audit pick up elements of this within it, and certainly I would expect Mike to pull me up and say that's inconsistent with my knowledge, Emily, but it hasn't been formally audited or peer reviewed at all. We do have an LGA peer review coming in the council that will consider governance and arrangements across the piece. So it may be something that they consider, but I think it'll be up to the reviewers as to which elements that they consider. If I could just quickly come back on the financial regulations, I think that's a useful idea. I think I just want to, I guess, warn the committee. I think there's two things you can do on a review of financial regulations. You can take the previous version and track changes, or you can start again. My thoughts on my review at the moment is that I will start again. So it won't necessarily be something where I can say this is the old and this is the new. I can certainly provide the old and provide the new, but just to say my current thoughts are is likely to be a fundamental review rather than a tweaking here and there. So the type of information I'll provide you won't be easily trackable from one thing to the next. But that's not to say you shouldn't look at it. I just said that's my current thinking of the review.
We appreciate the heads up. Thanks. Any further questions on this item? No, great, thank you. That brings us to item 9, which is the audit findings update. Emma again.
Thank you, Chair. So the audit findings update for 2025. This report is to inform Audit Committee members of the progress made on the recommendations set out in the final external audit report for the financial years 2021-22 and 2022-23 for the London Borough of Ealing and the Ealing Pension Fund. The recommendations were raised as part of the audit undertaken by the Council's external auditors at the time, which were Deloitte. Key points is that the current position of 15 recommendations, all of these bar one have been fully implemented from the assessment, and as of the last year's progress report, which is in Appendix 3, we have, sorry, these are the internal audit recommendations and not the value for money recommendations. From the prior year, of the 41 recommendations reported, 30 were fully implemented and 11 were in progress. However, that has now moved on, and the current position is 30 of those recommendations are no longer on the list due to Deloitte being satisfied that the requirement had been met. 10 are now fully implemented, and 1 control relating to the ICT access review that you'll see on the recent one is still in progress. I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you, Emma. Sandy.
Just going back to my old hobby horse of self-assessments, is this self-assessed completed, or is it independently verified completed?
So with the updates on the audit recommendations, we have assessed them ourselves and obviously had feedback from services that it related to, but we have also provided this information to our current auditors, Forbes Mazars, for their review, and obviously because they will then be tracking the progress of those for the future years.
I picked up from last time from Suresh that they wouldn't be following up old findings. So hence my question of have we independently had that assessed internally by either internal audit or assurance, if assurance exists at the council. But so yeah, so you're saying Mazars will be looking at this as a part of their work.
We've provided, yeah, we have provided the evidence for everything that was implemented. We've provided evidence recently for this particular audit as well. So yeah, it ran tracking alongside me doing this report. Our external auditors reviewed it as well.
Thank you.
Emily, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to add, they may not have thought that they needed to follow up all of them, but I think because it was a value for money point that Deloitte had made, they did have to complete their value for money audit with this backstop, and therefore in order to assure themselves that that weakness that Deloitte had picked up in there, I'm sure they can explain for themselves, but this is my understanding. They did have to follow up that we were making progress. As Emma said, we did provide evidence, and I believe my reading of their value for money report was that has now been satisfied, and they were satisfied that we were taking action and following those up. But obviously they can speak, and Suresh will speak for himself as VFM comes, unless there's anything you wanted to say on that now.
Thank you, Emily. Any further questions on this item? Alan?
Yeah, quick and simple one. Chair, page 110, the user access reviews, which is the only item from this appendix which is still in progress. Is there a target date of implementation for that one?
So that is, it's under progress within a wider project which relates to the migration of our financial system. So with the access reviews, when we move to a cloud-based system from the service we currently have, all access reviews are being undertaken in order to fulfil that project itself. So that project is due to be at the point of access completion checks by 2026. So we would expect the access that we've currently also migrated in our income management system, which again, access to that system was under review as part of the project. However, just to sort of reassure the committee, to mitigate the risks of the access to our systems, there is a rule set up within the systems that does mitigate those risks. So therefore, if somebody doesn't access an account for over 45 days, the account will then become dormant and no access is then available. So this is useful when you've got the sort of levers or the movers within the organisation that no longer require their previous access.
Just a question on the closure seems to be related to joiners, movers, leavers. Normally you'd have a separate control around IT on a quarterly basis. They'll send out access listings. So this is not being integrated into joiners, movers, leavers, is it, in terms of the control? It's just joiners, movers, leavers just happens to be a secondary process as part of that, is that correct?
Yes, it is, yes. And ICT have also, as part of this, acknowledged that a report is now required for those joiners, leavers and movers, and that will then be integrated into a monthly process moving forward.
Thanks, Emma. Any further questions? Councillor Martin.
So I was also looking at the IT type stuff. So there was that one and the business about access monitoring, mirroring rather, that comes later on. I'm just wondering if we're a little bit behind what other people are doing, because obviously also worked in a complex organisation where we did the levers the next day because there's a risk there if you don't. And mirroring, I would have thought, was resolved by setting up roles that people are put into rather than copying somebody else's. So is it because we haven't got those systems, or why are we sort of doing it the way we're doing it at the moment, I suppose is my question.
So overall with levers, the processes are in place. So if I were to leave the council tomorrow, my profile would be stopped, and therefore when a profile is stopped, that stops all access to everything. However, you may appear as live within another system, and that's what Deloitte had picked up on, that is that your name can still appear on a system even though you have no access and ability to access. So we are mitigating those risks for those scenarios. However, just to let you know, so the list that the access mirroring appears on is the previous year's list, and that fell off that list and now doesn't appear on the newer internal controls, and it's that specific one that is the outstanding. So this one was satisfied in terms of that profile deletion at the point of somebody leaving, so therefore access can't then be made. So we're not far behind. However, there are always improvements to be made, and that is where we're moving through these projects to make sure that there are processes in place.
Thanks, Emma. Any further questions? No, thank you. I believe that brings us on to item 10. We'll give Emma a break. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to feel slightly joined up now. My first paper is the internal audit plan, and ticking a couple of boxes that have been raised in earlier conversations. We're looking at the business world system and looking at the IT controls, which will also include user access. So it will give assurance around that. And whilst we don't look through and follow up every single one of those, when we do a key financial, we will do it and get assurances that they've implemented external audit recommendations as well as internal audit recommendations. So we don't just pick the areas where Emma's had a kicking. We do a wider assurance piece. So we look at the risk register. We go out and meet with strategic directors, key directors. So we'll meet with IT, HR, legal, and those kind of people who across the organisation talk about some of their risks where they've seen issues. So we kind of keep it live, and it's not just down to the risk register, which often the kind of strategic risks we've got don't move on from year to year. So if we kind of just took the risk register, we'd do the same audit every year. We also look at mitigated controls. So for example, the payroll system, it's our biggest system. If suddenly we took away all the controls in the payroll system, it would become our biggest risk. Because of all the financial transactions. So we go in and we make sure that those controls are still operating in the way that we'd expect. So we kind of have these conversations to look at those. We look at audits that we haven't done for a while and consider whether they're bigger risks, and we prioritise our list of projects. So kind of setting the scene. Emma also mentioned the new accounts receivable system. So we're looking at we're looking at that one because it's a new system and hence change of control. So we want to make sure that that new system isn't going to suddenly have a massive gap, and give assurances on those. So we, as part of the planning process, have those conversations to try and keep it live and look at the biggest risks to the council, along with just the risk register. We horizon scan. We talk to external audit. And peers across London to kind of see what their key risks are. Ultimately, we've come up with a very long list of all the projects that we could do, which is pretty much the list in the appendix of the 1 to 5 year plan, and then we come up with the key priorities for the service over the next year, which is the operational internal audit plan, which is on page 125 through to 127. And this is the sort of areas of coverage that we will do, and we'll report back to you on during next financial year. Just to add, in terms of the ICT levers, we've also got the Intune project, which is around some of the controls around these assets and how we link in starters and levers. So that's on this year's plan. So we are kind of picking up some of those issues again, and we'll give you some kind of assurance around that, or otherwise. So we then set out kind of indicative periods of when we're going to complete the work, and we'll hope to deliver that and report back to you on that. The plan does remain agile and flexible, so if a new risk emerges during the year, we will have conversations and we'll consider whether that new risk is something that we should be considering and giving assurance on in priority over these, and we may make a change to the plan during the year. And any changes that we do make after this one are reported back to you, so it's not like Emily's gone, like, do us a favour and drop that audit. I wouldn't. We would report back and explain to you why we felt that was a new higher priority, and why we pushed that back. Usually it would be a deferral just down to timing rather than a cancellation. We would go on and look at it in the next financial year. It's just prioritising resources to the key risks. So any questions on the plan?
Right. Do you have any concerns in meeting the plan, and are you resourced to deliver the plan?
We're confident we can deliver the plan. It's the first time we've used days in a while, because we've previously been using PwC to deliver it, and we've kind of scheduled it out and are confident we can deliver that.
Any further questions? Alan?
Yeah, I believe you, Mike. I mean, just looking ahead to the next report, actually, so I probably shouldn't be referring to it out of order, but we've got a backlog against delivery of this year's plan. So just really to prod your answer to the last question, you'll be in a position to deliver 25-26 in full. You're confident about that?
Yeah, so talking about stepping ahead to this year's, we're behind where we would want to be, but we've now kind of allocated all of the projects bar one, which we've asked our partner contractor to deliver, and we're fairly confident that we can deliver the 24-25 plan in a reasonable time frame. We've considered that there may be a little bit of a backlog, and we knew with the insourcing arrangement this year and bringing the team in house that was always going to be a greater risk this year, but we've considered that, and we're not saying we're going to deliver everything by the 31st of March. We're being realistic, but we're confident that most of it will be delivered, and we'll be able to report a significant completion of the plan to you in July. And we've factored in that there might be some backlog, and we're still confident that we've got the resource to deliver next year's plan on top of any backlog that we might have. If it all goes horribly wrong, we'll reprioritise and we'll come back to you in the future, but we've kind of scheduled everything, and we're confident that next year's plan is deliverable on top of any backlog that we might have from this year.
So sort of transitional year, I suppose.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Martin.
Just a clarification, really. So what, on some of the lines you've got ticks in various years, is that a review or a continuation, or is that another aspect of that particular area?
So the strategic plan, I think you're referring to at page 29. So I kind of call that my audit universe, and not everybody has one of these, but I like it to go back to. And if I could give you £1 for every time I went to an auditee and they said, "Oh, but you did that one last year," and it's like, no, we didn't. We did it 3 years ago. It's a very helpful, and I think it's also helpful to share with yourselves. So if you're looking at it and going, well, I'd like a look at voids, and it's like, actually it was done last year, so it's reasonable it's not being done this year. We tend to look at the risk of systems, so any key financial system we will do in a 3-year framework or sooner. So for example, the key income system's being done after 2 years because we're having a new system, so it increases the risk. External audit traditionally would take a 3-year reliance on our work. They don't place any reliance on our work, and that's not because it's bad now. They will consider kind of what we do, but it's not done in the same way. But we find that a 3-year cycle with consideration of emerging risks is there. Key systems are therefore generally done on a 3-year cycle. Things like health and safety, we rotate and do some coverage in health and safety on an annual basis. Things like risk management, we're looking at it annually. Contract management, we tend to do a contract on an annual basis, but not necessarily everything. We might look at it, but we will. In this year's plan, we're looking at the contract management framework rather than a specific contract. So we kind of consider all those in the round, and there are some areas where you'll notice there isn't a tick, and it's that we haven't done it in recent years. But we do look at it and go, do we need to look at that? And it's always considered, but we haven't done it in the last 5 years. So it's considered to be a lower risk, or it might be, some of them are a one-off because it was a brand new system, and we don't feel we need to consider it again. So it's kind of that aide memoir, but in the honesty box, I'm like, we'll leave the list on there, so we at least consider whether it needs to be there, and we're open to your challenge if it hasn't been done for a period of time and you think it needs to be.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you, Councillor Martin. Any further questions on this item? No, thank you. That brings us on to item 11, which is the progress report on the work of internal audit and anti-fraud for Q3.
Thank you, Chair. A few spoilers on this one. This updates you against the plan which you approved back last March, and performance against that, as we've kind of alluded to already, not exactly where we want to be. We have done a couple of additional projects as well, and some advisory pieces, which is kind of helping management prepare and make sure that controls are in place. We have completed 5 projects in the period, 2 advisory reports, and as kind of paragraph 5 on page 141, the summaries are there. Drawing your attention to the Car Club report, which is an assurance report. It's a relatively small area, but one where the control had unfortunately significantly lapsed, and something that has been responded to. It's sat within housing environment. That's now been transferred to resources and the fleet management to actually bring this in and kind of align it to our other vehicle usage, which brings some inherent controls in there. So the risk on that is already mitigating, but there's additional measures that they need to put in place, and we'll report back to committee on the progress against that. Flagging a couple of advisory pieces where, so we mentioned the Business World system, which is looking at that. So if Emma's got questions about kind of what does good control look like in terms of the new system and moving to the cloud, she'll have ongoing conversations rather than us coming in next year and bayoneting the wounded. But we always do a kind of advisory, we'll always do an assurance piece retrospectively to make sure that those controls are there, and we rotate the people who give the advice so that we've always got that independence and challenge on processes. So in terms of overall delivery, like I say, slightly behind where we would want to be. Everything's now been allocated, and we've got auditor working on it, and I'm fairly confident we'll deliver a good chunk of the plan, and hopefully reporting most of it back to you at the next committee. Follow-up actions on page 143 to 145. So we met with the chair prior to the meeting, and it was asked that Stephen and Joe from housing attend in respect of the temporary accommodation health and safety. Members have previously asked if officers could come and explain where actions haven't been taken, and we agreed with the chair that those were the would be the best people to attend this meeting. So if you've got questions on particularly 16, 17 and 18, Stephen and Joe can are happy to take questions on those. Just before we kind of move on to that, probably just to mention the fraud work, some amazing work by the fraud team this year. We're just short of £1 million notional actual savings. We've already passed the £1 million mark, which is great result, great work by the team. We've recovered 15 properties back this year. I'm fingers crossed we'll get to 20, which has always been my target since I joined the council 8 years ago, which would be a great result. But really pleased with the work of the team. We're recovering those properties, and they're able to be reallocated for those with a genuine need. We'll also do some work on the waiting list, which helps prevent and protect again that essential resource for those with a genuine need. So I say absolutely great work, and just wanted to flag that work and ensure members were aware of it. Happy to take any questions on that at large, and Stephen and Joe are here on the implementation of regs.
Thanks, Mike. We'll begin with any questions for Mike, if anybody has any. Alan?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned before, haven't we, that there's a long list of outstanding recommendations from management, and it's good to hear that action is being taken around those. On that list, though, items 6 and 7 not actioned because the original manager, the original owner, left the council, and just really could you comment on that and what the procedure usually is if the person sort of identified as having to implement a recommendation has left in the interim? Does it get kicked upstairs?
The lady to my right can probably reassure you that it does get kicked upstairs. Essentially, we went straight to the new person who queried whether it was relevant to them and whether it was actually somebody else who should have picked those up. At which point I kicked it upstairs and said, I don't mind which of you it is, but if it's not one of you two, it's Emily. I think you used the phrase, I'll bang their heads together and we'll sort it out. But it did shift from one department who was very confident they could deliver it in the time frame to a new department who was less confident that they could deliver it in that time frame, whilst recognising that it was very serious and necessary to do. I've met with them and we've run through that, and they are now in a much more positive place as to what they need to do, and that they can progress that now to an implementation date of September. So an unfortunate delay, but not through the want of trying to make sure that ownership was maintained.
Emily?
Thanks. So on that individual case, absolutely, and certainly when it's in my department, I'll make sure that happens. I think there's an issue on process as well, which I think was the point as well that you're making. So SLT aren't satisfied with the number that we have outstanding at the moment. We've always said we need to be single numbers and it needs to improve, and we don't want to see the same ones on there. So SLT has had a number of conversations on this, and we're not making the progress that we expected to see. We have, since at the last meeting, agreed that SLT will personally sign off all recommendations of those in their area. So in the event, of course, that a manager changes, the SLT director will remain responsible and will need to find a new home for it. As a result of that as well, SLT members are expecting to take these, if they are not already, to their DMT meetings. So we should be tracking where people have moved on, because people do move on, where those homes should lie. So I think SLT recognise this isn't the performance that we should expect and that we need to improve, and we're putting sort of personal responsibilities on SLT members to make sure that we do we're not reporting the same number, to at least get down to single numbers for the next meeting.
Thank you, Emily. Sandeep.
Yeah, I see some dates for December 24, and they say in progress. However, there's not a revised date. So can we have revised dates put in there, please?
Mike?
I do always try and do that. So apologies, it's not come through in those cases, and we will ensure that we've got those. And if not, I'd suggest that maybe if we're not getting those implementation dates, I'll discuss with the chair if we can get those officers to come in and advise where we haven't got a revised date.
Thank you, Mike. Any further questions? Councillor Martin.
So just on the voids, so I see that the date has been put back, and I just wondered what's behind that. I know that each void is probably going to be a different issues relating to each one of them, and just, you know, how are we resolving that and finding a way forward? That, are you going to, you could talk about that as well, could you?
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so on that, we've got a focus group working on it at the moment. We've ploughed extra resource into it. It's a source of constant frustration for our team, because it's a whole mixture of a range of different issues, and always has been. For quite some time, we were working away and later found that the data was not quite what we'd hoped it was. And then we had a big focus on tidying that up. We've had a lot of issues around the energy meters, with debts on energy meters that need to be cleared, but also with the meters needing to be changed, and there's some complexity of the contractual arrangements around that, which has delayed everything. It's a litany of different obstacles that have all been put in the way, but we have got significant resource going into it, and it is actually starting to move. I've been really encouraged over the last couple of weeks that it has actually genuinely started to move now, so progress is moving forward.
And can I just ask you, is that being evaluated, say, numerically, on how many, how will we see the progress of it? I suppose it would be how many the numbers are reducing.
Yeah. So it's by numbers that reducing. We're now at under 300 voids remaining, and we track that weekly as to how many voids are remaining. But also we have stages that we track on the way. So how many are ready to let, how many ready to offer. And then by the teams that are doing the sign-ups, how many have they managed to get signed up and so on. So there's all those steps. We're looking at it weekly.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on this item? No. Okay. So I will invite Steve and Joe. Would you like to give a bit of background before we move on to questions, or are you happy for us to head straight into questions?
Straight into questions, please.
Great. Okay. I will ask the committee first and foremost if they have any questions on the health and safety for temporary accommodation.
I mean, it might be better if you did do the background, because we've got this point that health and safety checks aren't being made, which is a surprise. So getting some sort of context around that, or what your interpretation of that actually is, would actually, I think, might help us a bit.
Okay, no troubles. So an audit was taken in terms of looking at temporary accommodation across the piece and understanding about what checks were being undertaken. That was looked in 3 different chunks, effectively. The first chunk was looking at, do we have up-to-date leases in place? And if we do have up-to-date leases in place, are we storing them in a place where we can access them quite in an easy way? The second piece was then looking at the compliance across our temporary accommodation units. Do we have the right compliance checks in place? So when we bring on a new unit, are we making sure that we check for the gas certificate, electrical certificate, and any other compliance information that needs to be there? And then are we storing that in a way that makes some sort of sense so that we can then monitor that? Because obviously your gas certificates are around for a year and then they expire, and you need to make sure you're continually updating those. And then the last part of that is that my officers should be making regular checks across our temporary accommodation units. We should be not only visiting the properties, but also giving telephone conversations, speaking to the households, and making sure that if there's any repair issues, any other concerns relating to the property, that we monitor those, we take notes, we make sure we trace that through and make sure those are resolved at the other end. And all of that's really important because we place our most vulnerable residents into that type of accommodation. And sometimes some of those residents are not able to advocate for themselves necessarily, and it's an incredibly stressful situation to be homeless in the first place, and then to add on top of that, not being in suitable accommodation just heightens some of those challenges, and we've all followed that, I think, on the news in various different ways. So unfortunately the audit that was taken out both before Joe's and I's time, actually before we started in the organisation, gave nil assurance. So it was saying we didn't have any of those mechanisms in place. We weren't able to lay our hands upon the leases, and any leases we could were out of date. We weren't able to adequately demonstrate that we had done all those checks. We could find certificates, and we weren't. Whilst we said we were doing some of the spot checks, we weren't following our own procedures in terms of the way that we register that, monitor that, and move that forward.
So how are we getting on now? And I presume you are working your way through this, and you've got some level of where you've got to.
So those audit recommendations were meant to be implemented by the 31st of December. We haven't achieved that across those 3 points, but we've made substantial progress, I think, across all those different areas. For us, really, it ends up falling into 2 parts. The first part is, do you have the checks and balances now in place so that any new properties you're bringing on, you're making sure you're following that process? Do you have the checks and balances in place in terms of your spot checks? And then the second bit, which is the bigger piece, is around where we haven't done that in the past. Have we then followed that up and made sure that we do have all that information in place? Across those 3 areas, I'd say we're in terms of that, the audit recommendation, we're majority of the way there. So, for example, in the first recommendation, which talks about do we have leases in place, out of the 700, we've got 700 leases now in place. We've got a handful left that we need to make sure. It's like 8 we got still outstanding, and the reason we got 8 still outstanding is because we're going backwards and forwards to the agents trying to get those secured, and those are now being stored with our legals teams, but we now need to get them loaded on the system so we can find them. I'll let Joe talk about the second point and point 2 of the recommendation. The last point is around the spot checks. The spot checks are now happening. We do regular spot checks on a weekly basis. We need to do some more work in terms of making sure that we're recording that in an effective way. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think across that whole piece, some of the challenges have been that when you look under a particular issue, you identify other issues, and all those issues are interlinked, and so it's not possible necessarily to get to a linear point and saying that's done. You've got to do the other bits before you get to that final part. Joe, do you want to talk about the?
Thanks. Yeah, so on the health and safety checklist, so basically we've now got the process whereby there is a health and safety checklist which has to be completed before a new property is taken on board, and that process seems to be working well. All of the new properties since that's been implemented should all be fine, but Stephen and I are going to be undertaking a sort of sample check of those in the near future, which we've sort of programmed in. The other part of it is the historical ones, the ones that had already been taken on, and to get those, obviously that's a sort of mop-up exercise. So going through the checklist and working out what was missing, we've now reconciled those and identified it's mainly around the gas and electrical certificates, which is what we were mainly concerned about, because there was no evidence of that testing and safety. So we're now in a position where we've got 81% of the gas and electrical certification that we would need for those historical property, well, for all our properties actually. We are actively chasing the remaining 19%. The issues we've had, the reason it's taken so long is basically we're writing to the agents and the landlords asking for these certificates and not been getting the response that we would hope from some of them. We've written multiple times. We then wrote to them and said, if you're not going to do it, we'll do it for you and recharge you. And we've now started that process as well. So we have contractors now going out undertaking the works. That also has not proved to be as easy as we thought, because our residents are not willing to give access to the contractors. So yeah, we've written to the residents, we've had the contractors contacting the residents, and then sometimes we're getting no access on the doorstep as well. It's an ongoing battle, but if anything were to happen now, we could at least evidence as an organisation that we have taken due diligence, we have made reasonable steps. We're not in the place of risk that we were when this audit was carried out. So you can take some assurance from that, and obviously measures will continue in the way that they have been to mop up that remaining 19%. And then the only other thing to flag to committee is that obviously the focus of that audit was on before a lease is agreed, but of course certificates expire as well. So this is actually going to then be an ongoing process, which we've now started doing the mop-up of whenever they expire or before they expire. We're talking to our landlords again.
Thank you, Joe and Stephen. Are there any further questions to either of them from the committee? No. Sandy?
Your process, is it pretty paper email based, or is it a system driven process? Do you have like a database or,
That's a very good question. So because we were doing it in a big rush from scratch initially, it has been very much Excel spreadsheet and email more than anything else, phone calls and so on. What we're doing now is we're just uploading all the certification that we've received onto a system we have called True Compliance, which is a compliance system that drives the ongoing reminders and automates it all. So that's the next step. Those should all be uploaded probably within the next month or so, and then we can come off of that manual process.
and what about the checklist as well? Is that manual at the moment? So can you implement it into the system so you have everything in one place?
That is a manual system at this moment in time. We run a number of different IT systems, and some of them they don't talk to each other in the way that we would like them to. There is a program to look across all our IT systems and try and to integrate them a little bit better, and so this process will form part of that integration. It's not something that will happen in the next 3 to 6 months, but it is something we know we need to address.
You mentioned 19. So you're saying you're 81% compliant overall, or was this? So I know you mentioned 3 elements. So overall, are you around 80 or 90% compliant in where you need to be?
So that's the gas and electrical certificates. If you add up the total number of gas certificates, total number of electrical certificates that we have versus what we should have, that's where the 81% comes from. Yeah, so that it's the number of certificates that I'm talking about there.
Is that the same with leases? Can you tell us where we are on the leases then, please?
Yes, so in terms of leases, we have 8 leases outstanding. We've got 702 in place, so the majority of them are in place.
Thank you. Joe, you alluded somewhat as to why the December deadline was missed. Stephen, can you tell us why the December deadline was missed on the leases side?
There's been a number of factors that we need to work through. So part of that is getting underneath our data and understanding our data. We have then had to, you draw up the lease, you then have to go back to the landlord and have conversations with the landlord or via the agent in terms of to renew that. Sometimes that negotiation can take a little bit of time. Quite often that we found that because we started that conversation with the landlord, they've come back to us and said, we'd like to increase your rent. And so then you're starting a rent negotiation at the same time. So it hasn't been, it's not necessarily a straightforward process across each of those.
Thank you. How confident are we then that we'll meet the next deadline? I believe it's set for April. I'm
confident from the lease perspective we'll get to that place. I'm confident from the spot check perspective we'll get to that place. We are doing as Joe says, a sample check of all the new properties brought on board in the next couple of weeks. That'll give us confidence one way or the other in terms of whether our new systems and processes are working. I feel relatively confident that we're going to hit the 1st of April deadline.
Thank you, Ian and Joe.
Access is a real issue, and it is for any kind of physical visits for compliance. So I am reasonably confident. I guess with any kind of compliance, it's rare to get full 100%. But yeah, I'm going to stick my neck out and say I am reasonably confident. We're going to pull out all the stops to make that so.
Thank you, and thank you for attending this evening and answering our questions. Before we move on, I will check if there are any further questions. No, thank you. Great. Okay, that moves us on to, oh, I beg your pardon, Emily.
Chair, I know there's an issue on BFM, the BFM conclusion from the external auditors that refers to the issues in relation to the housing regulator. I'm probably not best placed to answer any questions that the team might have on that, but Joe might be. So I don't particularly want to hold Joe back particularly, but I know that is probably the one item that might warrant discussion by the committee when it gets to the BFM item. And I'm probably just not the right person, but you might have someone in the room that might be.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Joe, are you happy to stay? Thank you. Steve, and I'm so sorry I didn't catch your name. Oh, fine, great. Steve, in that case, you're welcome to leave if you'd like to. Great, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item 12, risk management. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. So I think kind of hearing committee last time, feeling that a number of the risks and mitigations hadn't moved on, I took those words back to SLT, who responded very positively. There are a number of changes which are summarised in paragraph 2. I know Alan was keen that we track them, but there was too many changes that it was realistic to have a track changes to it. So we've summarised what those changes are. I think some of this was probably the SLT maturing from a very new group when the risk register was set to actually now reflecting specific ELIN risks and things like inspection, so the CQC happening, the Ofsted happening, and so it's now gone from preparedness and the regulatory compliance to the kind of actual, we've had the inspections and these are the measures and the realistic risks that we need to take, and that conversation I think was very encouraging and very realistic about those risks. So I think we've got a much better picture of the council's risks and the things that the SLT is working to manage and mitigate and move forwards in the risk register that we're presenting to you today. And kind of any questions on any of those changes or anything else in relation to the risk register or process.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions? No? Okay, great. Mike, off the hook. That brings us to item 13. Thank you, Suresh, for rushing over from Camden. I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and yeah, thanks for accommodating. It was Greenwich, even further away. So, but and apologies to everybody for the later start than normal and probably a later end. And apologies now for colleague over there who's having to stick around for a bit longer. I've got colleagues Katie and Rajesh who will pick up a couple of detailed points on the two reports that we've got for you. But let me just give you the headlines because I think it's probably more positive than it looks. So you'll probably be sick of hearing auditors talking about disclaimed opinions. But obviously we reported to the last committee that given the statutory deadline of 28th of February, so on Friday, and the requirement for you to publish audited accounts, we made the determination that we didn't have enough time to audit your March 24 accounts. Hence, we are issuing a disclaimed audit opinion similar to what you've had, unfortunately, for the last 2 years. Rajesh will update the value for money point. I think that's really pertinent to what you just heard there. But it is important to remember that this is all because of a statutory deadline now. So we and you are required to meet that statutory deadline, and that was obviously imposed constraints in terms of what we can do on the main council. Pension fund, and this might sound quite perverse, is in a better position. So we've issued a qualified opinion, but again, I stress that is all to do with meeting the statutory deadline, the 28th of February. We have carried out a full audit of the March 24 year-end accounts in terms of the year-end balances, and we agreed to do that prior to Christmas. And actually, we've done it in about 4 or 5 weeks. So actually, it's been a very good audit from our perspective. And actually, as a foretaste of what's going to come when we come to do the accounts, so we've been very impressed with the level of responsiveness from the finance team, the quality of the working papers, and generally how on top of things the finance team has been on the pension fund. So if that gets replicated for the council audit, I think, you know, we are in a relatively good position. So, you know, it's always daunting doing a first year engagement. You never know what you're going to find, but actually the pension fund has been a really positive experience for the team. And we don't say that always. So please take assurance from that. But the qualification then is essentially now the consequence of the disclaimed opinion from the March 23 year end. So if you remember, March 23 accounts were disclaimed, which essentially means there is no assurance from the auditor on those accounts. What that means is the starting point for these March 24 accounts, so the prior year comparators, we had no assurance from the previous auditors. What we have been able to do is carry out fairly a large amount of work to get assurance on the majority of those prior year comparators. So which is obviously for a pension fund, it's a little bit more straightforward because the majority of your the biggest item in the accounts is the assets that you hold, the investment. So we've actually tested both the March 23 and the March 24 investment balances and some other aspects of the net asset statements. That gives us some assurance over those prior year comparators. Unfortunately, not enough to issue an unqualified opinion. If we hadn't done that work on the prior year comparators, we would be looking at another disclaimer, because essentially the lack of assurance of opening balances would be pervasive across all the opening balances, but we've done enough to give us the qualification. And this is what will happen for your council accounts as you move forward. So I'll come on to rebuild and assurance, but essentially the guidance indicates that to move from a disclaimed audit opinion to an unqualified will include qualified accounts. How long that takes, I'll come on to that at the end maybe. But so this is a natural kind of consequence of these statutory requirements that we're obliged and you're obliged to now to deal with. I know it's no comfort, but there will be hundreds of councils up and down the country receiving disclaimed opinions. And in London, the majority of councils are receiving disclaimed opinions. Again, I know that's no comfort, and I know how Emily feels about it, so that's no comfort, but just to put that into context. But like I say, it's been a really positive experience, positive start, really good relationship I think we've started to establish, and I think it does put us in good stead for 24-25. And actually pension fund 24-25, assuming nothing else comes out of the woodwork in terms of national issues or any local issues, we will actually probably move to an unqualified opinion, which isn't bad given you've had, what, how many, two years of disclaimed? So, like I say, I know it doesn't sound it when I talk about a qualified audit opinion, and if you know a bit about accounting, you'll probably think that's just horrendous, there's something wrong going on. But hopefully we've articulated to the extent that makes sense. And I'm happy to take any questions out, because I do appreciate it's a little bit difficult to get your head around when talking about a qualified audit opinion. Do you want me to stop there and just take questions on that, and then I'll ask the colleagues just to give you a bit more detail on some of the papers?
Great, thank you, Suresh. Are there any questions on that? No, I think you have explained it really clearly, so thank you.
Okay, Rajesh, do you want to talk about the council report, and then Katie will just touch on the pension fund?
Thanks, Suresh. On the council side, we presented our audit strategy memo in the last audit committee. And there's no change in our approach and strategy since the last committee meeting. Our final materiality threshold is 1.8% of the gross revenue expenditure of the council, and it equates to 23.9 million. And our performance materiality is 40% of our audit materiality, which is around 9.6 million. And our clearly trivial threshold is 717K. As Suresh said that we 23-24 was a backstop audit opinion, so we have not carried out the detailed audit field work, so we don't have any audit findings or other misstatement to report on. However, management has passed 3 adjustments in the account after publication, and these are presented on page 373 of the audit pack. Out of these 3 adjustments, 2 related to central service charge recharges reclassification, and 1 is related to capital grant income. Coming to the VFM work, so we have completed the VFM assessment as in case of a normal year. It doesn't have anything to do with the backstop opinion. So we have assessed the council's VFM arrangement on all 3 criteria, which is financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. So on the financial sustainability and economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, we don't have any significant weakness to report on. However, in case of governance criteria, the predecessor auditor raised a significant weakness in the previous year. And there were three components of their significant weakness. The first was related to the head of internal audit opinion, which was a limited assurance opinion in the previous 2 years. However, during 23-24, the assurance level has increased and it's a reasonable audit opinion. So we consider this element has been addressed by the council. The second component of their significant weakness was related to implementation of the external auditors finding. So as at the end of 31st March 23, as per the audit completion report of the predecessor auditor, there were 10 observations which were open, and out of which 9 have been addressed by the council during 23-24. We looked at the supporting documents. We had a meeting with the management. So we are satisfied that all those 9 have been implemented. Just one ICT, which we discussed earlier, that's in progress. So this element also we consider that this has been addressed. The third component was related to the risk of fire, other health and safety management, where the regulator of social housing issued a notice in 2022. And that notice is still in place. It has not been withdrawn. The council's team having regular catch-ups meeting with the regulator. And initially, the notice was related to electrical safety, but now during 23-24, they have widened their scope and they now want the council to report on all comprehensive housing regulatory compliances. So this is the element which we think that it's still in place and which we will continue as a significant weakness in our auditor's annual report. And the recommendation from us here side is that the council should engage with the regulator more proactively and try to address all the applicable compliances which are related to health and safety. So that's all on the overall on the VFM. So at the time of writing this report, our internal consultation on the VFM and our audit opinion was in progress. We have concluded those consultation now. There will be a slight change in the wording of our audit opinion, which is currently appearing on page 398 of the audit pack, the first paragraph and the underneath table. So yeah, so apart from that, that's all on the council.
Do you want us to stop there, Chair? Well, maybe colleagues in the room in terms of answering the question around the health and safety matter.
Yeah, I'm sure colleagues want to ask a question about that. Councillor Martin, did you want to ask a question? No, I mean, you indicated.
No, only that I think you just were asked to stay just to talk about that item. So have you seen this report, or are you aware that what's in it?
I'm not, but I assume that was a fair summary, and it didn't hold any surprises for me at all. Nikki and I, the strategic director, and I are meeting monthly with the regulator for social housing in regards to the health and safety issues. So the main concerns that the regulator's flagging now, as you mentioned, it's much wider remit than it was originally. She's very concerned about making sure that our stock data is on a very good basis. So we're undertaking a full comprehensive stock condition survey. We've got 79% of our stock has a very recent stock condition survey undertaken. So that's significant. The other thing she's concerned about is reconciliation across all the different compliance work streams. She's flagged that. She's concerned to know how we deal with vulnerability. So our vulnerable residents, how do we prioritise work for them, and how do we make sure that we minimise risk? So she's got quite a high emphasis on how we manage the risk whilst things are not fully compliant as well. Obviously, those fire and electrical remedials are still outstanding. We've made some good progress on that recently, but not as fast as we would like. So we've got a hit squad, basically. We've got a no access task and finish group and a compliance task and finish group, which are working through this, and we brought on some significant additional resource, which will be continuing for another 3 months, intending to get back to compliance within that period.
So I was going to ask, I mean, are you resourced to enable you to get to the compliance? And are we definitely doing what we need to do to ensure that that can take place in sort of timescale we'd like it?
Yeah, I think that the leadership has been very supportive in the sense of allowing us to recruit the resources that we need to. We're just about to ramp up that sort of final step to get the extra fire resources we think we need, and we're moving to we're doing a major restructure and recruitment drive as well to get permanent staff on board. But just at the moment, we're just trying to get sorted out with interims. But leadership has been supportive in making sure that we can do that.
Thank you, Jo. Councillor Martin, any further questions from the committee? No. Alan?
Thanks, Chair. Not for housing officers, if that's all right. One for Suresh and one for Emily, I suspect.
Absolutely.
Suresh, I thank you for that really clear explanation about the qualified opinion on pensions and the process. I had a 42-year career in local government finance, and nobody said the words disclaimer of audit opinion in the first 41 of those. Really, I think you said there's clearly a process to getting us to a position where we can have unqualified audit reports again, and you suggested that might take a little while. Can you say a little bit more about that? And then for officers, the annual governance statement, and on page 357, some issues identified in relation to 23-24. Is this intended that you report back to us on delivery against those later in the year?
So it's kind of a big question in terms of the process for what's called rebuild and assurance. Disappointingly, the leadership of local public audit moved from the Financial Reporting Council to the MHCLG, Ministry of Housing, Local Government, Governments 2 weeks ago, which is a little bit of an indication of it's still all up in the air in terms of providing a clear steer to audit firms of what we need to do to start rebuild and assurance. And there is currently a difference of opinion across the firms of the extent of work that's required. So essentially, no audit firms started doing substantially rebuild and assurance on a council audit because of that indecision at the system leadership level. The complication is, I'm sure some of you will appreciate, but your council accounts include not just your council general fund accounts, essentially. You've got a HRA, you've got a collection fund, you've got all these weird, well, of course, statutory overrides, which ensure that your counter tax doesn't get affected by things like depreciation on your assets. You've got a statutory override for your dedicated schools grants, for example, where you've got a deficit position. So all these complications mean that it's not easy to work out. If I test all these opening balances, I can then audit the year-end balance and give you a clean opinion. Unfortunately, we have to unwind some of those statutory, or potentially have to unwind the statutory override. So the short answer at the moment is I don't know what we need to do to rebuild assurance. What I do know, and what we will be doing with Emily and Emma, is agreeing a timetable for carrying out the 24-25 audit, auditing those accounts as we would do normally. We will then have to wait, and we'll do our bit in terms of the system leadership to try and get a decision about rebuilding, but at the least we will make a start on the 24-25 accounts So we'll get those accounts started and done, irrespective of what we don't get from the system leader. That probably doesn't help that much, but does that give you something at least?
Thank you. Emily, did you want to add something?
I wasn't going to.
You want to answer Alan's second question.
Yeah,
I beg your pardon.
I mean, Suresh knows I'm keen for us to rebuild assurance as soon as humanly or even inhumanly possible. Clearly we've had disclaimed opinions and won't be expecting to pay the full audit fees for the previous auditor or indeed this audit. So we've got money to do that. Suresh knows that we will pay for the assurance that we need. So it's just a matter of getting the resource and the people around. There just aren't enough public sector auditors around because people like me leave the sector. So it's really important for us at Ealing to rebuild that as soon as possible. I think you all know that we've been disappointed and indeed frustrated that we have continued to prepare our financial statements in line with the statutory deadlines and what we believe is a good quality accounts. And thank you, Suresh, for the comments previously. I know you've yet to audit them, so you can't give us that assurance, but the direction of travel is helpful. And I agree that we started to develop a really good working relationship, and we've really thank you for your work, because it has been a breath of fresh air. So that was a preamble into the annual governance statement. So the question that I was asked was that there is 3 significant governance issues identified in the annual governance statement that Alan referred to. I'm trying to find the page. That doesn't help, just so 357. Oh, thank you. It's just on the side in the blue in case anybody wanted to follow it. They weren't significant governance issues in sort of specific issues that the council particularly has identified due to particular weaknesses, but overriding risks essentially that the council has to manage. So there's a financial risk of financial pressures and local government funding reform, workforce retention and use of agency, and also compliance with regulations and policy. Now, you've all seen our risk register. Those 3 feature heavily in that risk register, and so we track and monitor through there. Having said that, I think what Alan suggested is really helpful. We will report back on these as we prepare the 24-25 AGS, which we're already in the process of doing at the moment. But I think it would be useful if, as we prepare 24-25, we have significant governance issues, that we make sure we report that through to the year, because it's probably a bit late for us to tell you when we prepare the next year that we have or that we haven't resolved some of those issues. So I think that's a really helpful suggestion. We'll certainly bring back 23-24 movement as part of our 24-25, but as we move forward, we'll think about how we update committee during the year.
Great, thank you, Emily. Any further questions? Suresh, I'm assuming you've got more you want.
There was just a pension fund.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you, Katie.
Yeah, thanks, Suresh. So if I could direct your attention to page 409 of the pack, where we outline the status of our audit work. So since we prepared the report, all work has now been completed and subject to review. But from this review process, it was noted that we needed to perform additional work over the completeness of the membership data that is sent to the actuary for the purpose of preparing the triennial valuation. But we've since obtained the additional information required, and this work's likely to be completed tomorrow morning. Following on from that, on page 419 of the pack, we also outline our control recommendations. So we've made a recommendation that the assessment of the fair value levelling should be carried out on every investment in the portfolio, and then reviewed prior to inclusion in the accounts. This is because we noted a material classification error in both 22-23 and 23-24, resulting in 35 million and 33 million pound adjustments from level 2 to level 3 investments in each year respectively. This recommendation was also raised by Deloitte in 21-22, but from our conversations with management, this review process was not implemented due to the tight timeframe between completing the previous audit and starting this current audit. Yeah, we're now happy to take any questions on the pension fund report.
Thank you, Katie. Any questions on that from colleagues?
So that last point is just classification, is that correct? Yeah. So. Okay.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, I think that's right, and it was something that was pulled over from the previous year. I think as you've explained, you'll know that sort of delays in the audit opinion meant sometimes we were already preparing one set before we'd had the reporting back for the other. Nevertheless, I've now had 2 auditors say to me that we've not done the levels correctly. So I've asked as I review this year's financial statements, 24-25, which we're closing on at the moment, that I'm reviewing those working papers as I sign off those financial statements.
Thank you, Emily. That's really helpful. Any other questions? No. Great. Does that bring you to the end of your report?
Well,
No,
I was just going to say, to bring it to a close, I think the plan is to sign the accounts and the audit opinion tomorrow, which will enable you to publish your accounts before the 28th of February deadline.
Thank you, Suresh. So can I ask the committee to approve the statement of accounts? Thank you. That brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you, and I apologise it was such a long one today.